Can you imagine a 72-year-old father standing in the cold rain, clutching the only suitcase left after a lifetime of hard work, realizing that the very son he had given birth to, raised, and loved more than anything in the world had taken it all away? Not a stranger, not a street thief, but his own flesh and blood. This is the story of Harold Bennett, a man who lost everything because he trusted the wrong person. Watch until the end, and comment with the name of the city you're watching to let me know how far my story has progressed. The eviction notice was taped to my door at 7:15 in the morning. I know the exact time because I had just finished brewing my coffee, the same cheap dark roast Margaret used to say smelled like a diner at 4 in the morning, which she somehow meant as a compliment. I had the mug in my hand when I opened the door to get the newspaper, and there it was. A single sheet of paper in a yellow envelope, pinned to the wood with a piece of tape that hadn't even been pressed down properly, like whoever put it there couldn't be bothered to make sure it would stay. Notice of unlawful detainer. You are hereby required to vacate the premises at 4417 Carver Street, apartment 2B, within 3 days of this notice. I stood there reading it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand the words. I understood every single one of them. I stood there reading it because my brain refused to accept that they applied to me. To Harold Bennett, to a man who had paid every bill on time for 41 years, who had never once been late on rent, who had raised a son in this city and buried a wife in it and thought he would die here quietly, the way he'd always lived. Without drama, without scandal, without ever being the kind of person who received papers like this. The coffee went cold in my hand. I didn't notice. I called Ethan 4 times before 8 o'clock. The first call went to voicemail. I left a message, calm, controlled, the way you talk to a grown man when you're trying not to panic. Ethan, it's Dad. I got some kind of notice on my door about the apartment. I'm sure it's a mistake, but call me back when you can. The word mistake felt necessary. It felt like armor. The second call went to voicemail too. I didn't leave a message. The third time it rang twice and then stopped. Not voicemail. Silence. The kind that tells you someone declined the call. I sat down on the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared for 37 years. The mattress dipped the way it always did, familiar as my own heartbeat, and I pressed my hands flat against my thighs and tried to think clearly. 6 weeks earlier, I had transferred $240,000 into an account Ethan had set up. That was every cent I had. The insurance payout from Margaret's policy, the money from selling the house we'd owned in Delbrook before I'd moved to the city to be closer to him after she passed. 2 decades of retirement savings that we had protected like something sacred, because it was the thing that was supposed to carry me through the rest of my life. The cushion between me and disaster. Ethan had presented the plan with the kind of quiet confidence I had always admired in him. He sat across from me at this very kitchen table, spread out printouts, showed me listings. Dad, property values in this neighborhood are about to jump. If we buy together now, we lock in a price before the market shifts. You'd have your own floor, your own entrance. We'd be 5 minutes apart. Isn't that what you want? And God help me, it was. After losing Margaret, the loneliness of that apartment had become a physical thing. Some mornings I woke up and couldn't remember why I was supposed to get out of bed. I missed having someone to cook for, someone to argue with about which route to take to the grocery store, someone who knew my coffee order without asking. The idea of living near Ethan, of Sunday dinners, of being useful as a grandfather if he ever had children, of not dying alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with the television running, it was everything. I didn't ask nearly enough questions. That's the truth I have to live with now. I was 71 years old. I had just lost the person I loved most in the world. And my son was offering me something that looked like a future. So I signed where he told me to sign and wired what he told me to wire, and I trusted him the way you trust blood. The fourth call, the one I made at 8:47, went through. Dad? His voice was flat. No warmth, no concern. The voice of a man who had been expecting this call and had decided exactly how to handle it. Ethan, what is happening? There's an eviction notice on my door. It says I have 3 days. I can't. I know about the notice. The sentence landed like a fist. I know about the notice. Not what notice. Not I'll sort this out. He already knew. What do you mean you know about it? My voice cracked somewhere in the middle. I hated that. Ethan, the lease on this apartment, I thought it was transferred to the building account. That's what you said. The new management company. Dad, I need you to listen to me. He exhaled. Not a sad exhale. A tired one. Like I was a problem he was bored of solving. The deal fell through. I told you real estate is volatile. These things happen. The deal fell through. I repeated it slowly, the way you repeat something in a foreign language you're trying to learn. The deal fell through and you put an eviction notice on my door. I didn't put it there, the building did. You've been month to month since September. I thought I mentioned that. You did not mention that? I'm pretty sure I did. Ethan. And my voice went somewhere I hadn't meant for it to go. It went low and quiet, and it asked the question I wasn't ready to ask out loud. Where is the money? Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone who had prepared for this question and was deciding whether to use the answer they'd rehearsed. It's tied up in the investment vehicle. I told you this would take time. $240,000. My entire retirement. Margaret's life insurance. I stood up. I didn't know I was going to stand until I was already doing it. You are telling me it's tied up? Dad, you're getting worked up. Don't! The word came out sharp enough to cut. Do not tell me I'm getting worked up. You took everything I had. You told me we were buying a house. You told me we'd be neighbors. And now there is a notice on my door, and you are using words like volatile and investment vehicle, and you won't look me in the eye because we're on the phone. Where is my money? I'll call you next week. He said it the way you'd say I'll call you back when you're putting someone on hold. Casual. Final. Like I was a minor inconvenience in an otherwise busy day. Ethan. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. The coffee was stone cold. The eviction notice was still in my hand, soft at the edges where I'd been holding it. Outside, the city made its ordinary morning sounds. A bus somewhere, a dog barking, a child shouting something bright and unintelligible. I sat back down. And for the first time since Margaret died, I let myself cry. Not the quiet, private kind I'd done at her bedside. The ugly kind. The kind that sounds like something breaking. Margaret had seen it before I had. That was something I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed. She had never said it directly. Margaret wasn't a woman who made accusations without evidence, but she had said things, small things that I had stored away without understanding their weight. Ethan always has an angle, Harold. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying, when he does something nice, follow the logic to the end. He's charming, your son. The question is whether he uses it on people who deserve it. I had defended him every time, because he was my son, and because loving someone means giving them the benefit of the doubt, and because I genuinely believed, down to my bones, that whatever edges Ethan had were edges I could smooth with enough patience and enough love. Margaret had raised an eyebrow at that. She had a way of raising one eyebrow without saying a word that communicated entire paragraphs, but she hadn't pushed. She died in February. By April, Ethan was sitting at my kitchen table with the real estate printouts. The timing. God, the timing. I hadn't seen it then. I saw it now, standing in an apartment that no longer belonged to me, trying to figure out how to pack 40 years of a life into 3 days. The moving was the worst part. Not emotionally. Emotionally, I had already been gutted. I mean, practically. I was 72 years old with a bad hip and no one to help me. I called my neighbor, Dolores, who was 81 and had her own troubles, and she came down and sat in a chair and told me what to keep and what to donate while I did the lifting. She brought sandwiches she'd made herself and coffee from her own pot because she knew mine was already packed. You got somewhere to go? She asked at one point, not looking at me, studying a photograph of Margaret I'd set on top of a box. I'm working on it, I said. That was a lie. I had nowhere to go. I'd called the 2 old friends I still had in the city, Bill from the plant where I'd worked for 22 years, and a man named Rogelio, who I'd known since Ethan was in elementary school, and one was in a facility with his wife, and the other had a 1-bedroom he shared with his daughter. I was not going to be someone's charity case. I wasn't built that way. Harold. Dolores put the photograph down. My daughter has a couch. Dolores. It's a pullout. She's in Millfield. It's only temporary. I almost said yes. And then I thought about what temporary meant. A few weeks of feeling like a burden, watching her daughter rearrange her schedule around my presence, sleeping in a living room and pretending it wasn't humiliating. And then what? And then where? I'll figure something out, I said. Dolores looked at me the way Margaret used to look at me when she knew I was wrong, but also knew I needed to be wrong for a while before I'd accept help. I spent the last night in that apartment on the bare mattress because the movers were coming early and I didn't want to unpack the bedding. I stared at the water stain on the ceiling that I'd stared at for 7 years. Margaret used to say it looked like a rabbit. I never saw the rabbit, but I used to say I did because it made her happy. I'd have given anything in the world to see it just then. The first week after the eviction, I stayed in a motel off Highway 9, a place called the Lakeview that had not seen a lake since approximately 1987. It cost $68 a night, which meant it was burning through the $1,400 I had in my checking account at a rate that would leave me empty before the month was out. I tried to call Ethan 12 more times in that first week. 6 went to voicemail. 6 didn't connect at all. On the 7th day, the voicemail box was full. I went to his apartment building on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd been there twice before. Once when he first moved in, once for a dinner that had ended in an argument about something I couldn't even remember now. I buzzed his unit from the lobby. Nothing. I buzzed again. The super came through the lobby on his way to somewhere else, and I asked him if Ethan Bennett was home. The man looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He moved out, he said. Last month sometime. He moved out. Yeah, didn't leave a forwarding. I walked back to the bus stop and sat on the bench for 40 minutes without taking out my phone or doing anything at all. A pigeon worked the sidewalk near my feet. Somewhere down the block, a woman was arguing on her phone in a language I didn't speak. Ethan had moved out last month. While we were still talking about the house, while I was still asking questions and getting answers about investment vehicles and volatility. He had already moved out and hadn't told me. The planning involved in that was something I had trouble fitting inside my understanding of my son, because it required a specific kind of coldness, not the impulsive cruelty of a man who does something terrible in a moment of weakness, the deliberate long-game coldness of a man who had mapped it out, who had watched me grieve his mother and seen an opportunity, who had stood at her grave with me and held my arm and said, "I've got you, Dad," and been lying through his teeth. That was the moment, on that bench, with the pigeon and the arguing woman, when whatever story I had been telling myself about my son stopped being possible to believe. By the 3rd week, I was sleeping in my car. I had checked out of the Lakeview to preserve the last of my money. I had a 2009 Buick LeSabre that Margaret had always referred to as the barge, with affection, and I moved my essentials into the back seat and told myself it was temporary. That word again. Temporary. It was not temporary. The car was cold by mid-October. I had a sleeping bag I'd used for exactly one camping trip 20 years ago, and I layered it with a fleece blanket and wore my coat to sleep and still woke up at 3 in the morning, unable to feel my feet. I drove to the 24-hour diner on Peneth Avenue every morning for coffee and used the bathroom there to wash up, which required moving through the world with the specific kind of dignity that costs you something every single time. I ate once a day. Not because I wasn't hungry, but because money was the last thing I had left to protect. A social worker found me in the parking lot of the diner one morning. Young woman, maybe 30, carrying a clipboard. She had the practiced, careful look of someone who has learned to approach people like me without making us feel cornered. "Sir, are you living in this vehicle?" "I'm visiting." She looked at the sleeping bag pressed against the window. She didn't say anything about it. "My name is Andrea. I work with the city's Elder Services Division. There are resources available if—" "I'm fine, thank you." I started the car. "Sir," I pulled out of the parking lot. I drove 3 blocks and then sat at a red light and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached and told myself to stop. Stop being proud. Stop acting like accepting help is the same thing as giving up. But pride is the last thing you have when everything else is gone. And I couldn't let go of it yet. Ethan called me in the 4th week. Once. At 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up. Dad. Different voice now, not flat. Something else. Something that sounded almost like guilt, which I should have known was not the same thing as remorse. Ethan. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. I heard you were... Someone told me things are rough right now. Who told you? It doesn't matter. Look, I want to make this right. That's why I'm calling. My heart did something I wish I could take back. It jumped. Because I was his father, and even then, even after everything, some part of me wanted to believe he was capable of making it right. Okay, I said carefully. I can get you a check. Not everything, not right away, but something to cover rent somewhere temporary while I work out the rest of the investment. How much? $1,500. $1,500. Out of $240,000. A gesture so small it was almost insulting, and yet, God, I needed it. And the rest? I asked. I'm working on it, Dad. The market is Ethan. Something hardened in me then, something that had been trying to harden for weeks and kept being stopped by the part of me that loved him. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Pause. Was there ever a house? Silence. Was there ever a property? Were those listings real? Or did you take my money and I am never seeing it again? The silence stretched out long enough that it became its own answer. Send the $1,500, I said, and don't call me again until you have the rest. He never sent the $1,500. He never called again. The night I collapsed, it was raining so hard the gutters were running like rivers. I had been sick for 3 days. Nothing dramatic, a chest cold that had moved into something deeper, the kind of illness that a man my age with no warm place to sleep and 1 meal a day is not equipped to fight off. I had a cough that came from somewhere in my chest that scared me a little, and my head had been heavy and thick since the day before. I had parked the Buick near an old bus station on the east side of the city that had been decommissioned years ago because the awning gave some shelter from the rain and because no one bothered me there. But the cold that night was serious, and my heater was running down the gas, and I made a decision I should not have made. I got out to stretch my legs and try to clear my head. I made it about 30 yards before my legs stopped cooperating. I didn't lose consciousness, not entirely. It was more like the world went sideways. The rain and the concrete and the orange glow of a distant streetlight all tilted, and I put my hand out to catch something that wasn't there. And then I was on my knees on the wet pavement with my palms flat on the ground and the cold coming up through them like something alive. I could hear the rain. I could hear a car somewhere far away. I thought about Margaret with a clarity that shocked me. Not the grief version of her, not the hospital version, but the ordinary Tuesday morning version, standing at the kitchen counter in her blue robe, with her hair still flattened from sleep, reaching past me for the coffee without saying anything because we were that comfortable with each other. I thought, I am going to die in a parking lot in the rain, and my son is not going to come. Then there were footsteps, running ones. Hey, sir, can you hear me? A voice, urgent, close, a hand on my shoulder. Not rough, deliberate. I've got you. Don't try to get up yet. I turned my head. A woman was crouching next to me, completely soaked, her dark hair plastered flat, holding an umbrella she'd apparently given up trying to use because she was using both hands to keep me upright. She had a bag over one shoulder and a press ID clipped to her jacket that was spinning in the rain. I'm fine, I said. Old habit. You're not fine, she said, without judgment. Can you tell me your name? Harold. Harold. She said it like she was filing it away. I'm Claire. I'm going to call for help, okay? Just stay with me. She pulled out her phone with one hand and kept the other on my shoulder, and the pressure of that hand, of someone simply touching me and not pulling away, undid something in me that I hadn't known was held together by the thinnest possible thread. I had a son, I said, to the rain, to the empty parking lot, to this woman I had never met. I trusted him with everything I had. Claire Dawson didn't say I'm sorry, or that's terrible, or any of the things people say when they don't know what to do with what you've told them. She stayed very still for a moment, rain coming down on both of us, and then she said quietly, and with a sharpness I felt even then. Tell me more. The ambulance took me to Mercy General. Bronchitis, dehydration, mild hypothermia. Not as bad as it could have been, which felt like the first genuinely lucky thing to happen to me in months. Claire Dawson sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. I know because the nurse told me when she brought me juice and crackers and said a woman outside wanted to know how I was. I didn't know what to make of that. People don't wait for strangers in hospital waiting rooms, not unless they have a reason. When the doctor finally let me out into the hallway, Claire was still there, laptop open on her knees, typing something. She looked up when she heard the door. "You didn't have to wait," I said. "I know." She closed the laptop. "How are you feeling?" "Better." I looked at the press ID still clipped to her jacket. Claire Dawson, senior correspondent, the City Ledger. "You're a journalist." "I am." "And you found me in a parking lot in a rainstorm." "I was coming back from a source interview. Wrong place, right time." She paused. "Or maybe right place, right time, depending on how you look at it." She tilted her head slightly. "Harold, what you said out there, about your son, do you want to tell me the rest of it?" I stood in that hospital hallway in a paper gown and borrowed socks, 72 years old, with nothing left to protect or preserve or be careful about. And I made a decision. "You have somewhere we can sit?" I asked. She did. And so I told her everything, from the kitchen table and the real estate printouts to the eviction notice to the phone call where his voicemail box went full. All of it, 2 hours of it, sitting in plastic chairs near a vending machine that hummed the whole time, while Claire Dawson listened with the particular quality of attention that makes you feel, for the first time in a long time, like what happened to you matters to someone other than yourself. When I finished, she sat with it for a moment. Then she said, "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Go ahead." "Have you contacted anyone, an attorney, Adult Protective Services, the police?" "No." "Why not?" I looked at my hands. "Because it was my son," I said. "Because I kept thinking, I kept hoping that he'd fix it." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Do you have documentation, the transfer records, the account information, anything he gave you in writing?" "In my car, in a folder. I kept everything." Margaret had taught me that. "Always keep the paper, Harold. You never know." "Okay." Claire folded her hands on the table. Her expression was careful, but her eyes were something else. There was a kind of focus in them that I would come to recognize over the weeks that followed as the face she made when she had already started building something in her mind. "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly." "All right." "What happened to you? I don't think you're the only one." She said it quietly, watching my face. "I've been working on a piece about financial fraud targeting seniors in this city for 6 months. The pattern you're describing, a family member, a trust-based transfer, a property deal that never materializes, I've heard versions of it before." The hum of the vending machine filled the space between us. "You're saying he's done this to other people," I said. "I'm saying it's possible." She paused. "And if it is, then you have more power in this situation than you think." I had not felt power in a very long time. The word landed strangely. "What happens next?" I asked. Claire Dawson looked at me with those sharp, focused eyes and said, "First, we make sure you're somewhere safe and warm. Then we find out exactly who your son really is." Outside, the rain was still coming down. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Bennett was sleeping in a bed I had paid for, in a life he had built on a lie. But he didn't know yet that someone had pulled his father out of a parking lot, and he didn't know what that woman with the press ID and the soaking wet jacket was capable of. Claire found me a room that same night. Not a shelter. I want to be clear about that because I had too much stubborn left in me to accept a shelter. And somehow she already understood that after 2 hours in a hospital waiting room. It was a weekly rate motel on Garfield Street called the Elmwood. Clean enough, with a working heater and a lock on the door that actually caught. She paid the first week herself, which I told her I would not allow, and she told me to consider it in advance against the story she was going to write, which was a polite fiction we both agreed to believe so I could accept it without feeling like a charity case. "I'll pay you back," I said, standing in the doorway with my one bag. "You'll tell me the truth," she said. "That's enough." She left me with her card and a paper bag that turned out to contain a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, and I sat on the edge of the bed in that small, warm room and ate all of it, and did not feel grateful so much as I felt the specific shame of a man who has spent his whole life being the one who provides, and suddenly cannot provide even for himself. I slept 10 hours, the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. I woke up, and the heater was still running, and the lock was still caught, and for about 30 seconds, before I fully remembered where I was and how I'd gotten there, I felt almost normal. Then I remembered, and normal went away. Claire came back the next morning at 9 o'clock with 2 coffees and a yellow legal pad. She sat in the one chair the room had, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and she said, "I want you to walk me through every document you have, everything Ethan gave you, everything you signed, every transaction. Start at the beginning and don't skip anything because you think it's minor." I got the folder from my bag. It was a manila folder, slightly water damaged at one corner from a night the backseat window hadn't sealed properly, but everything inside was intact. Margaret had been the organized one, but she'd trained me well enough. Account statements. The wire transfer confirmation, $240,000. Transferred on a Tuesday in April, the day I remember because it was raining then too, and I'd thought that was a strange coincidence, rain on such an important day. A typed summary of the investment plan that Ethan had prepared, 3 pages, with projected returns and a timeline and a name for the property management company I had never once thought to verify. Crestline Property Group. Claire wrote it down and underlined it twice. "You ever meet anyone from this company?" she asked. "Anyone besides Ethan?" "No, he said he was handling the relationship, that I didn't need to be involved in the business side." She looked up from the legal pad. "Did that feel strange at the time?" I thought about it honestly. "It felt like trust," I said. "Now it feels like being managed." She nodded and wrote something else. "What about the account he had you wire to? Was it in his name?" "A business account, Bennett Capital Advisors, LLC. I'd looked it up afterward during the motel weeks on the library computer. I searched for it. No website. No registered address that matched anything real. When was the LLC filed? February. The same month Margaret died. I had not said that out loud before. Saying it now made my jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the remnants of the chest cold. Claire caught the pause. She was good at catching pauses. "February," she repeated, not as a question. "His mother died in February." The room was quiet for a moment. Outside, someone in the parking lot was revving an engine. "I'm sorry, Harold." "Don't be. Be useful." I meant it without cruelty. She understood that because she went back to writing. She spent 3 hours with that folder. She photographed every page with her phone. She asked questions that were sometimes obvious and sometimes so precise they made me feel like she had already been inside the story and was just checking her map against mine. At one point she stopped and looked at the typed investment summary for a long time without speaking. "This formatting," she said, almost to herself. "What about it?" "I've seen documents like this before. The language in this section," she tapped the second page, "about projected asset appreciation. It's almost word for word." She looked up. "Harold, I want to show you something, but I need you to prepare yourself. I'm 72 and I've been sleeping in my car. I think I can handle it." She almost smiled. She turned her phone around and showed me a screenshot of a document. Different names, different numbers, but the same structure, the same paragraphs, the same assurances about market timing and projected returns. "Where did you get that?" I asked. "From a woman named Sylvia Marsh, 78 years old, retired school teacher. She lost $160,000 8 months ago." Claire set the phone on the bed between us. "To a man named Daniel Cross, who, according to 2 separate sources I haven't been able to get on record yet, is not actually named Daniel Cross." I looked at the document. I looked at the name she'd written on her legal pad. Crestline Property Group. Then I looked at her. "You think my son is Daniel Cross?" "I think it's possible that your son has used more than one name," she said carefully. And I think the document in your folder and the document Sylvia Marsh showed me came from the same source. I sat with that for longer than I could have predicted, because a father hearing that his son might be a con man operating under multiple identities should feel something enormous. And I did feel something enormous. But it wasn't the shock it might have been a month ago. It was more like the last piece of a picture clicking into place when you've already figured out most of the image and were just missing the final corner. He was always good at being whoever the room needed, I said quietly. When he was 17, there was a teacher he didn't like, Mr. Prentice, and Ethan spent 3 weeks figuring out exactly how that man thought, what he responded to, and then he worked it perfectly until Prentice thought Ethan was his best student. He told me about it afterward, like it was a game he'd won. I paused. I thought he was clever. He is clever, Claire said. There was no admiration in her voice, just the flat acknowledgement of a fact. That's what makes him dangerous. She left around noon. She said she needed to make calls, cross-reference some information, and reach out to a source at the county registrar's office. She said she'd be back tomorrow. She said not to contact Ethan again under any circumstances. If he reaches out to you, she said from the doorway, don't answer. Or if you do, don't tell him where you are or that we've spoken. Can you do that? After what he did to Sylvia Marsh, I said. Yes. She nodded. She started to leave, then turned back. Harold, for what it's worth, you're not stupid. I need you to know I'm not thinking that, and I need you to stop thinking it about yourself. He targeted you at your most vulnerable, and he used your love for him as the mechanism. That's not naivety. That's someone exploiting something real. I didn't say anything. She left. I stared at the ceiling of that small, warm room for a very long time. But the next 4 days were the strangest I had lived through in all of this, which is saying something. Strange because nothing was happening to me directly. No evictions, no collapsed phone calls, no parking lots in the rain, but everything was happening around me, just out of sight, and waiting has its own particular kind of wait. Claire called every evening with updates delivered in the careful, non-committal language of someone who has learned to not promise more than she can deliver. The county registrar's office had records of Bennett Capital Advisors, LLC, but the registered agent address was a mail forwarding service. Crestline Property Group had been filed in a different county 6 months before my wire transfer and dissolved 3 months after. The name Daniel Cross appeared in a civil dispute in another city 2 years ago. A case that had been settled out of court, details sealed. Settled, I said when she told me that. Someone else figured it out and he paid them off. That's my read too, she said, which means he's been doing this long enough to have cleanup money. The thought sat cold and heavy in my chest. On the 4th day, she asked if I was willing to meet someone. Sylvia Marsh lived in a ground-floor apartment in the Northgate neighborhood, a small, tidy place full of books and photographs, and a cat named Winston who regarded me with immediate suspicion and then changed his mind and sat on my foot. She was a small woman with white hair and precise, deliberate movements, and she poured tea before she said a word about any of it. We sat across from each other at her kitchen table, and I recognized in her face something I had seen in the mirror. A particular kind of dignity that has survived something that tried to take it. He introduced himself as a financial advisor, she said. A friend of my nephew's. Very polite, very patient. She wrapped both hands around her mug. He came to my home. He brought a fruit basket the first time. He asked about my late husband. He spent 40 minutes asking about Bernard before he mentioned anything about investments. He asked about your husband, I repeated. He wanted to know how long we'd been married, what Bernard did, whether I managed the finances or he did. She set the mug down. I understand now that he was assessing how much I knew about money, about accounts, about what questions to ask. I thought about the kitchen table, the real estate printouts, Ethan knowing, of course he knew, that Margaret had managed our finances for most of our marriage and that after she died I was adrift in the paperwork of my own life. He knew exactly what he was doing, I said. Yes. Sylvia looked at me steadily. They always do, dear. They hit me. Not he. They. As if what had happened to us was common enough to require a category. How much did you lose? I asked, though Claire had already told me. 162,000. Everything from selling the house when I moved to this apartment, and my husband's pension payout. She was matter-of-fact about it in the way people are when they've already done the screaming privately. I reported it to the police. They took a report, and I never heard another word. Did you hire an attorney? I tried. I had no money left for a retainer. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than if she'd said it with bitterness. My daughter wanted to help, but she has 3 children. I didn't let her. We sat with that for a moment. Winston the cat shifted on my foot. Claire thinks that the man who took your money and the man who took mine are the same person, I said. I know. She showed me a photograph. Something in my stomach turned over. And? Sylvia looked at me carefully. The man who came to my home had a beard and wore glasses and said his name was Daniel Cross. The man in the photograph Claire showed me was clean-shaven. She paused. But the way he held himself, the way he stood with his shoulders. She touched the side of her mug. I'd know that posture anywhere. You spend 40 years as a teacher, you learn to read how a person occupies space. My son. She was describing my son's posture. I looked out her kitchen window. The afternoon had gone gray, clouds coming in low. I thought about Ethan at 10 years old, standing at the end of the diving board at the community pool, the way he'd stand there with his shoulders back and his chin up, making a performance of his own confidence even when I could see his hands shaking. I had always loved that about him, the performance of courage. I had thought it meant he had it underneath. Maybe it just meant he was a good performer. I'm sorry, I said to Sylvia. I'm sorry my son did this to you. She looked at me sharply. It's not yours to apologize for. I know, I'm apologizing anyway. She was quiet. Then, he used your grief as a door, she said. He watched you lose your wife and he walked right through it. That's not something a father makes. She met my eyes. That's something a person chooses. I drove back to the Elmwood that evening and sat in the parking lot for a while before going inside. The sky had settled into a flat, dark gray, and the air smelled like rain coming. I thought about Margaret again. Not the kitchen counter version this time. The version of her at the end when she already knew, and she took my hand and told me to watch myself. Watch yourself, Harold. Promise me. I had promised. And then I had wired $240,000 to my son's shell company while my wife was barely cold in the ground. But I also thought about Sylvia Marsh wrapping her hands around her mug, describing the fruit basket and the questions about Bernard. And I thought about whoever else was out there, whatever other kitchen tables Ethan had sat at, whatever other grief he had walked through. That was the thing that finally moved me from pain into something more useful. Anger is consuming. I had learned that in those first weeks, it burns through you and leaves you hollow. But what I felt sitting in that parking lot was different. It was quieter than anger, more sustainable. It was the specific, settled feeling of a man who has decided that this is not finished and that whatever it costs him, it is going to be finished correctly. I went inside and called Claire. I want to do whatever you need me to do, I said when she picked up. Interviews, statements, whatever you need on record. I'm done being careful about it. A pause. Harold, you understand what that means? Your name is in the story. Ethan's name is in the story. I understand. People will know. Your friends. Anyone who knew your family. Claire. I sat on the edge of the bed in the Elmwood, same position I'd been in since the first morning, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months settle into my spine. My son stole from me and from at least one other elderly woman and probably more people we haven't found yet. I am done protecting his name. I am done being the reason he gets to keep doing this. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, but there was something underneath it. Not excitement, exactly, but the energy of someone who has been building a structure and just found the last critical beam. I need to tell you something, she said. I got a call this afternoon from my editor. He's been approached by a man who claimed to be a financial advisor, asking questions about what I was working on. This man, she paused, described himself as a source who wanted to help. The hairs on my arms went up. Ethan, I said, I can't confirm that. The name he gave was different, but my editor said he mentioned you by name, Harold. He said he was concerned about an elderly man who had been confused about a financial arrangement, and was speaking to journalists under a misapprehension. Her voice was flat, professional, but I heard what was underneath it. He was trying to get ahead of the story. The cold I felt then was not from the temperature of the room. Ethan knew. Somehow. Through what? Through who, I didn't know. He knew that a journalist was building a case, and instead of running, he was doing what he'd always done. He was managing the narrative. He was walking into the room with a fruit basket and a smile and a story that made me the confused old man and him the concerned, reasonable son. "He's not going to stop," I said. "Is he?" "No," said Claire. "He's not." "Then neither are we." I could hear her writing something, the scratch of pen on the legal pad. Then she said, quietly, "Get some sleep, Harold. Tomorrow we go further." I lay back on the elmwood mattress and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain that had finally started up outside. And I thought about my son walking into a newspaper office, adjusting his shoulders the way Sylvia Marsh described, and constructing a performance for an editor who had no idea what he was looking at. He had 40 years of practice performing courage he didn't actually have, but I had something he had never once accounted for. I was still here. Claire's editor was a man named Ray Kowalski, and he called her the morning after Ethan's visit to the newsroom and told her to be careful. I know this because she told me about it sitting in the Elmwood small parking lot, both of us in her car with the engine running for heat, 2 coffees going cold in the cup holders. She had that look she got when she was measuring how much to tell me, a slight tightening around the eyes, a pause before she started talking that was just long enough to notice. "Ray wants to slow down," she said. "Not stop, slow down." Because of Ethan. Because of the man who came in and said he was worried about a confused elderly man who was being manipulated by a journalist with an agenda. She said it evenly, but there was something underneath it. He was good, apparently, calm, concerned. Ray said he seemed genuinely worried about you. The performance of concern. I had seen it my whole life and never named it for what it was. "What did this man look like?" I asked. "Glasses, beard." Ray said maybe mid-40s. She glanced at me. I showed Ray a photo of Ethan. He said he couldn't be certain, but the build was right, and there was something about the way the man moved his hands when he talked. My son gestures when he talks. He always has. Wide, open-palmed gestures that make him look transparent, trustworthy, like someone with nothing to hide. Margaret used to say he got it from me. I hadn't thought about it as a tool before. "Ray is worried about liability," Claire continued. "If we publish something that names Ethan, and we're wrong." "You're not wrong." "I know that, but knowing and proving are different distances." She picked up her coffee, looked at it, put it back. "I need more. I need someone who can connect the alias, Daniel Cross, to Ethan definitively. Or I need another victim who will go on record." The word victim still caught in me every time, not because it was wrong, because it was accurate. "How many do you think there are?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Based on the pattern and the timeline, at least 4, maybe more." She turned to look at me directly. "Harold, there's something else I haven't told you yet." I waited. Sylvia's nephew, the one who supposedly introduced her to Daniel Cross. I tracked him down last week. His name is Kevin Marsh. He's 34. He lives in Caldwell. She stopped. He had no idea. He never introduced anyone named Daniel Cross to his aunt. He doesn't know anyone by that name. When I showed him the photograph of Ethan, he said he'd never seen him in his life. The fruit basket, the friend of the nephew, a connection Ethan had invented from nothing because he understood that the best door into a person's trust is a door that looks like it was already there. He built a fake relationship, I said, used the nephew's name without the nephew knowing. Yes, that's not desperation, I said slowly. That's infrastructure. Claire looked at me. Yeah, she said, it is. We sat with that in the idling car, and I thought about the kind of mind that builds infrastructure for a con, that scouts targets, constructs fictional entry points, customizes the pitch for each person's specific vulnerability. Margaret's death had been my door. Bernard's memory had been Sylvia's. And Kevin Marsh's name had been borrowed without his knowledge, like a key copied without telling the owner. My son had not stumbled into this. He had built it. The second witness Claire found was a man named George Paulson. He was 69, a retired electrician from the West Side, and he had lost $80,000, his entire home equity line, to a man who had introduced himself as a property developer named Marcus Webb. George was not soft about it the way I sometimes felt I was. He was furious in the particular way of a man who has been furious for a long time and has learned to carry it without spilling it everywhere. We met at Claire's apartment, which was the first time I'd been there. A second-floor place in the Millward district, lived in and slightly chaotic, stacks of notebooks on the coffee table, and a corkboard on the wall of the living room that I understood immediately was the architecture of her investigation. George sat across from me on the couch and didn't waste time on pleasantries. "She showed me the picture of your son," he said. "Marcus Webb didn't have that haircut, but the face is close enough that I'd say yes, with better evidence." "What was his pitch to you?" I asked. "Warehouse conversion, affordable housing development. He said there were tax incentives for private investors, and he needed a fast-moving partner who understood construction." George's jaw shifted. I understood construction. That's why he picked me. He talked the language right. Load-bearing walls, zoning classifications, contractor bids. He knew enough to sound real. Did he have documents? Thick folder, architectural renderings, cost projections, projected rental income. All of it perfect. He said perfect with a specific kind of contempt. I've spent 35 years in this trade. I should have known that nobody who actually has a good deal needs to find a 69-year-old retired electrician to fund it. But he made me feel like I was the smart one who'd gotten in early. He looked down at his hands. "That's what they do, right? They make you feel special, like you're not the mark, like you're the one who saw it." I thought about the kitchen table, the projected returns. "Dad, if we buy together now, we lock in a price before the market shifts." The implication that I was savvy enough to understand timing, to act while others hesitated. "Yes," I said, "that's exactly what they do." Claire, who had been sitting at her desk across the room, turned around. "George, the name Marcus Webb. I ran it yesterday. There's a business registration in the state system filed 14 months ago, dissolved 8 months ago. The registered agent address is the same mail forwarding service as Bennett Capital Advisors." George looked at her. "Same company?" "Same mail drop. Different company names, different aliases." She came and sat on the arm of her chair. "But the same operation." The three of us looked at the corkboard. Claire had pinned up the document copies, the LLC registrations, a printed map with red markers that I now understood were locations, addresses connected to each alias, each victim, each dissolved shell company. The shape of it was there, visible now in a way that had not been visible when it was only my story. It was a machine, a careful, deliberate machine built to extract money from people at their most trusting and most vulnerable, then vanish before the damage could be connected back to a single source. And my son had built it. George left an hour later after giving Claire a signed statement. At the door he stopped and looked back at me. "Your boy did this to you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I got 2 sons," he said. "I don't know what I'd do." He paused. "Actually, I do know what I'd do. That's why I said I don't know." He shook his head and left. I sat in Claire's apartment after he was gone and looked at the corkboard, and Claire let me sit there without filling the silence, which was one of the things about her I had come to rely on, without fully realizing it. "How close are you?" I finally asked. "Closer." She was back at her desk, going through something on her laptop. "I have a source at the Financial Crimes Unit. She can't be quoted, but she can tell me if there's already a file open on any of these names." She glanced up. "There might be. These things sometimes get flagged through banking reports before anyone knows they're connected. And if there's already a file, then we're one piece of evidence away from this becoming a criminal investigation instead of just a news story." She held my gaze. "And a criminal investigation has a lot more teeth than I do." That night she drove me back to the Elmwood, and I sat in the room and tried to read a book I'd picked up from the donation box in the lobby. A detective novel, of all things, which struck me as either appropriate or cruel, and couldn't get past the first page. I kept thinking about George's hands, the way he'd looked at them when he talked about being made to feel smart. I knew that look. I had worn it at my kitchen table in April, nodding along to Ethan's presentation, believing I was the wise old man who had been let in on something worth having. The thing about being deceived by someone you love is that the deception gets layered into the love itself. Every good memory becomes a question. Every moment of genuine connection, or what felt like genuine connection, gets a shadow put over it. I found myself going back through years of my life with Ethan and holding each memory up to the new light and asking, was this real or was this practiced? And the honest answer was that I didn't know anymore. And not knowing is its own particular damage that has nothing to do with money. The call came on a Wednesday. I was at Claire's apartment, which had become the unofficial base of operations in the days since the George Paulson meeting. She had a printer and a good internet connection and a corkboard, and the Elmwood had none of those things. I had been going through a stack of printed bank records she'd obtained through a source, looking for transactions that matched the timeline of Sylvia's loss, when her phone rang. She answered, listened for about 40 seconds, and I watched her face go through 3 distinct changes: alertness, then controlled alarm, then something harder. "When?" she said. Then, "Does she know I'm aware?" Then, "Don't let her leave until I get there." She hung up and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not the focused, building something energy, something more urgent. "There's a woman at the ledger right now," she said, already reaching for her jacket. She walked in and asked for me by name. She says she knows Ethan Bennett and she wants to talk. I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. Her name was Paulette Okafor, and she was 53 years old, which made her younger than every other person in this story. And when Claire and I walked into the small conference room where she'd been waiting, the first thing I noticed was that her eyes were red, and she had not been crying recently. She had been crying earlier and had stopped and was now operating on the other side of whatever the tears had cost her. She looked at me and I watched her recognize something in my face. "You're the father," she said. "Yes." She nodded once, like this confirmed something she'd already decided. "My name is Paulette. I was Ethan's, I don't know what word to use. I thought I was his partner. I thought we were together." She looked at her hands flat on the table. "I found out 3 weeks ago that he was using my address as a mailing address for a business I had never heard of. There was a piece of mail. I opened it by accident." She looked up. It was a cease and desist from a law firm about a disputed investment. The room was very quiet. "He told me he was a financial consultant," she said. He was kind, or he seemed kind. For 8 months, he was the most attentive man I've ever been with." She stopped. "I know how that sounds." "It doesn't sound like anything except the truth," Claire said. "He used my address," Paulette repeated, like she was still working out the shape of what that meant. "My legal address. My name could be on—" She stopped herself. "I went to an attorney. He said I'm probably clear as long as I cooperate with any investigation, that I didn't knowingly participate. But probably. He said probably." She pressed her fingertips to the table. "I need you to understand I did not know. I need that on record." "It's on record," Claire said. She had her legal pad out. "Paulette, when did you last see Ethan?" 11 days ago. We had dinner. He seemed, I don't know. He was checking his phone more than usual. He left early. He said he had a work thing." She exhaled. "I haven't heard from him since." 11 days. That was around the time Ethan had walked into the Ledger's offices and performed concern for Ray Kowalski. He'd been closing down around himself, pulling in the edges, and Paulette hadn't known she was watching someone prepare to disappear. I looked at her across the table, a woman who had been used in a different way than me, but used just the same. Her address, her normalcy, the domestic legitimacy of her life borrowed without her knowledge to give his operation an anchor, and felt something I hadn't expected. I felt responsible, which was irrational. I knew that. But she had given 8 months of her life to my son, and my son had given her nothing real in return, and I was the closest thing to an explanation she was going to get. "I'm sorry," I said. Same thing I'd said to Sylvia, and meant it the same way. Paulette looked at me for a long moment. "He talked about you." she said. He said you were difficult, that you'd had a hard time since his mother died, and that you sometimes called too much. She paused. I believed him. I told him he should be patient with you. My chest did something complicated. He was managing the story, Claire said quietly, making sure if Harold ever reached out to Paulette, the version of Harold she heard about first was unreliable. He was building a wall between us, I said. Yes, said Claire. We sat with that. Paulette was looking at the table again. Then she reached into her bag and set something down in front of Claire. A phone. A cheap prepaid phone still in a plastic case. I found this in the back of my closet, she said, under a loose floorboard that I didn't know was loose until the building did repairs last month. I don't know what's on it. My attorney told me not to look and to bring it to someone official or someone who could tell me what to do with it. She looked at Claire. You're someone who can tell me what to do with it. Claire looked at the phone for a long moment. She did not reach for it immediately. She said, Paulette, if I take this to my contact at the Financial Crimes Unit, they will treat it as evidence and you may be called to testify to where and how you found it. Are you prepared for that? Yes, Paulette said without hesitating. All right. Claire picked up the phone carefully, holding it at the edges, and set it in a clean plastic bag she produced from her own bag, in a way that suggested she'd been carrying evidence bags long enough that it was just habit. This is the right call. I watched Paulette's face as the phone disappeared into the bag. She looked lighter, not better. There is no better yet, not at this stage, but lighter, in the way you feel when you have been carrying something alone for too long and you finally set it down somewhere it can be held by more than just you. I understood that feeling. It had taken me longer to get there, but I understood it. After Paulette left, Claire and I sat alone in the conference room. The corkboard in her apartment was in my head. All the red markers, all the names, all the dissolved LLCs and borrowed addresses and fruit baskets. He's going to run, I said, when he figures out how much we have. Maybe, she said, or he's going to try one more thing first. What do you mean? She was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant she was deciding how much to tell me. I think he's going to try to reach you, she said finally. I think he's going to try to do what he did with Ray, come in with a story that makes him look like the reasonable one. But this time to you, not to my editor, because you're the witness he can't afford. My hands were on the table. I looked at them. Older hands than I thought of myself as having, somehow. 72 years of work in those hands. If he contacts me, I said slowly, don't tell him anything. But don't cut the call off either. She met my eyes. If he reaches out, I want you to keep him talking. There it was, the thing she'd been building to. Not just a news story anymore, not just a witness statement. You want me to be the one who draws him out. Only if you're willing, she said carefully. Only if you're completely sure. I thought about Sylvia's hands around her mug, George looking at his hands, talking about being made to feel smart, Paulette's red eyes, the loose floorboard in her closet, and a prepaid phone that my son had hidden there like a man who has always understood that eventually he might need to run. I'm sure, I said. 3 days later, Ethan called. He called on a Saturday morning at 8:53. I know the exact time because Claire had told me to note it if it happened, and I had been noting everything since the day I walked out of Mercy General in borrowed socks. The number was different. Not the one I had for him, not the one that had gone to voicemail 12 times, not the one that had been declined twice. A new number, which told me he'd changed phones, or was using a temporary one, or both, which told me he was being careful, which told me he was not calling because he missed his father. I let it ring 3 times. Claire had said answer on the 3rd or 4th ring, not immediately, which would seem too eager, and not too late, which might spook him. I picked up on the 4th. Dad. His voice was different from the last time. Not flat, not tired, warm, the full warmth that I had grown up believing was the sound of my son loving me and now understood was simply the register he used when he needed something. Ethan, I said. I kept my voice neutral. Not cold. Cold would put him on guard. Just ordinary. The voice of an old man who answered the phone. I've been thinking about you, he said. I heard you've been having a rough time. I'm sorry I haven't called sooner. Things have been complicated on my end. Complicated. I filed the word away. Where are you calling from? I asked. I don't recognize this number. New phone. Work thing. Smooth, immediate, no hesitation. Dad, I want to see you. I think we need to talk face to face. There's a lot I should explain. There it was, the meeting. Claire had predicted it almost word for word. He would push for an in-person conversation because he believed he could manage me better in a room than on a phone. Because he'd been doing it his whole life. Because every time we'd had a difficult conversation in person, he had used his physical presence, the eye contact, the gestures, the performance of transparency to bring me back around. Okay, I said. A slight pause. He'd expected more resistance. Yeah? You said you want to explain. I want to hear the explanation. I kept my voice even. Where do you want to meet? There's a place on Carver, the coffee shop near where your old apartment was. Delancey's. You know it? I knew it. I had walked past it 3 times a week for 7 years. Ethan knew that. He was choosing ground that felt familiar to me, safe to me, which was its own kind of tell. He was managing the environment the way he managed everything else. What time? I asked. Tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock? I'll be there, I said. Another pause. I could almost hear him recalibrating, having expected a harder conversation and gotten an easy one. Good, he said. Good. Dad, I know things look bad right now, but I want to make this right. I genuinely do. Genuinely. That word in his mouth. I'll see you at 10, I said, and ended the call. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. I had expected them to shake. I sat on the edge of the elmwood bed and looked at the wall for a moment, and then I called Claire. She answered before the first ring finished. He called. Yes, he wants to meet tomorrow morning. Delancey's on Carver, 10 o'clock. I heard her exhale, not with relief, with the focused intensity of someone who has been waiting for a specific gear to click into place. Okay, she said. Okay. Harold, listen to me carefully. Claire met me at the Elmwood that evening with 2 people I hadn't seen before. One was her contact from the Financial Crimes Unit, a woman named Detective Sandra Osei, compact and deliberate, with the particular quality of stillness that people in her profession seem to develop, the ability to be in a room without taking up more space than necessary. The other was a man named Phil from the Ledger's legal team, who wore a jacket over a flannel shirt and had the look of someone who had been pulled away from a weekend and was professional enough not to show it. They sat in my small room, Detective Osei in the chair, Phil on the corner of the desk, Claire standing near the window, me on the bed, and we went through what tomorrow needed to look like. We are not running a law enforcement operation, Detective Osei said, very clearly at the beginning. I want that on the table. I'm here because Claire's evidence overlaps with a file my unit has been building for 4 months. What happens tomorrow is a meeting between a father and his son. What you do in that meeting is your choice. But, I said. She looked at me steadily. But if certain information were to emerge in that conversation, information about where funds have been moved or about other individuals involved or about plans to relocate, that information, if it reached my unit through appropriate channels, would be useful. I understood what she was and wasn't saying. You're not wiring me, I said. No, she said. I'm not. Because I can't, legally, without a warrant I don't yet have, and because it wouldn't be admissible in the way it would need to be. She paused. But Claire can be nearby, and you can call her the moment the conversation ends and tell her everything you remember. Phil from legal cleared his throat. Harold, I want to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to here. You're meeting your son voluntarily. You're not recording him. You're not representing law enforcement. You're a private citizen having a conversation. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. But if he makes any statements that constitute admission of fraud or any other criminal activity, and you relay those statements to Claire and Claire relays them to Detective Osei through proper channels, that's a chain of information that has value. I'm the starting point of the chain, I said. Yes. I thought about that, about being used as a mechanism again, not by Ethan this time, but by people who were genuinely trying to stop him. The difference mattered, even if the structure looked similar from the outside. All right, I said. Claire walked me through what to do and what not to do. Let him talk. Don't challenge him directly, not at first. Ask questions that sound like confusion or hurt rather than accusation. If he mentions the money, ask where it is in a way that sounds like hope rather than investigation. Don't say anything about Sylvia Marsh or George Paulson or Paulette Okafor. Don't say anything about Detective Ose. Don't say anything about the prepaid phone found under the floorboard. What if he gets hostile? I asked. Leave, she said simply. Stand up and leave. Your safety matters more than anything he might say. He won't get hostile in a coffee shop, I said. That's not how he works. He'll be charming. He'll be the concerned son. He'll try to make me feel like I've been the unreasonable one and he's been patient with me. I said it flatly, without anger, and I realized as I said it that this was what had changed. 2 months ago, that dynamic would have worked on me. The performance of his patience against my pain, I would have wanted to believe it badly enough to let myself believe it. Now I could see the mechanism and name its parts. Claire looked at me. Are you going to be okay in there? No, I said honestly, but I'm going to do it anyway. Delancey's was the kind of coffee shop that had been in the neighborhood long enough to have regulars who had their own mugs kept behind the counter. I'd been one of those regulars for 6 years. The woman at the counter, Rosa, recognized me when I walked in and said, Harold, we haven't seen you in a while. And I said I'd been away, which was accurate enough. I got there at 9:45. I wanted to be seated before he arrived, to not be the person walking into the room, to have the small psychological advantage of having been there first. I took a table near the window where I could see the door and where Rosa could see me if she looked over. Ethan walked in at 3 minutes past 10. He had shaved the beard. He was back to clean-shaven, the face I had known for 44 years, and he was dressed in a way that struck me immediately as calculated. Not sharp, not a suit, but neat. A gray sweater, dark jeans, the outfit of a man who wants to look like he's not trying. He spotted me immediately and crossed the room with the open, purposeful stride I had described to Sylvia, and she had recognized. He looked well. That was the first thing, and it landed somewhere ugly in my chest. He looked rested and fed and warm, and I thought about the Buick and the sleeping bag and the motel room with the $68 rate, and I kept my face still. Dad. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat without asking if he could. You look better than I expected. You expected something specific? He met my eyes, and I saw, just briefly, a flicker of recalculation. He'd expected me to be softer. I was worried about you, he said. I heard things had gotten rough. From who? Around. He waved a hand, the open-palmed gesture. I have some contacts who keep an eye out. He had people watching, or he was pretending to have people watching to seem more aware than I had given him credit for. Either way, the statement was designed to remind me that he had reach. Rosa came over, and he ordered a coffee and smiled at her in the easy way of someone who smiles at service workers automatically, and I watched him do it and thought about all the fruit baskets. You wanted to explain, I said when Rosa left. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, hands loosely folded, earnest, open. Dad, I made some mistakes. I know that. The deal didn't come together the way I projected, and I handled the communication badly. I should have been up front with you instead of going quiet. You changed your phone number, I said. I changed phones. Yeah, business reasons. You moved apartments without telling me. Things were moving fast. I should have told you. He nodded, acknowledging it, giving me the concession without resistance. Because that was the technique. Absorb the small accusations, seem reasonable, save the resistance for what actually mattered. I'm sorry for that, genuinely. There was that word again. Where's my money, Ethan? He looked down at his folded hands, a performance of difficulty. Dad, the honest answer is it's complicated. The investment structure. Don't. I said it the same way I had said it on the phone months ago, low and quiet, and it stopped him the same way. Don't give me investment structures. Give me the truth. Where is $240,000? He looked up at me, and I saw something pass through his eyes that was not part of the performance, a flash of something real, though I couldn't have said then whether it was shame or simply the calculation of how much I actually knew. Some of it is in accounts that are structured in ways that take time to unwind, he said carefully. Some of it has been used for operating costs that I expected to be covered by returns that didn't materialize. Operating costs, I repeated. This isn't simple, Dad. Were you ever going to buy a house with me? The question sat on the table between us. He picked up his coffee when it arrived and held it in both hands, and I thought about Sylvia holding her mug, and the contrast between the two of them was so sharp, it cut. That was the plan, he said. Things change. That was the plan, I said quietly. A week after your mother died, you were at my kitchen table with real estate printouts, and it was a plan. Something crossed his face. I still couldn't read it cleanly. She just died, Ethan. She had been gone for 6 weeks, and you sat in her kitchen and you sold me a plan. I thought it was a good opportunity. For who? The words came out before I could measure them, and I didn't try to pull them back. She wasn't cold yet, and you were already building the pitch. I set my hands flat on the table. I need to understand something. I need you to tell me the truth, just once, just between the two of us in this room. Did you plan it before she died? Did you look at her and see it coming and start thinking about how to use it? The silence lasted long enough to be its own answer. That's not fair, he said finally. No, I agreed. It's not. He set his coffee down. I watched him shift. Not physically, but something behind his face shifted, and the warmth dialed back slightly and was replaced by something more businesslike. I had pushed past the layer he'd prepared for this meeting. Dad, there are some people, he said, choosing his words with a care that had a different quality now, who are trying to cause problems, for me and potentially for you. A journalist. I know about the journalist. He went still. What do you mean you know? I mean I know. I held his gaze. I know about Sylvia Marsh, too. The name hit him the way I'd known it would. A small, precise flinch. There and gone in under a second, but there. A man who has spent his whole life managing his face cannot always manage it for things he didn't see coming. I don't know who... Daniel Cross, I said. The fruit basket. The questions about Bernard. The document that uses the same language as the one you gave me. I watched him. And George Paulson. Marcus Webb. The warehouse conversion. He said nothing. His hands on the table were still now. And Paulette, I said. Whose address you used, whose life you borrowed, whose closet you used to hide a phone. I leaned forward slightly. She cooperated, Ethan. Whatever was on that phone, she handed it over. Something happened to his face then. All the warmth, all the performance, all the careful calibration, it dropped. Not into guilt, into something colder and more pragmatic. And that was somehow worse than anything else that had happened in this conversation. Because it showed me the face underneath all the other faces, and it was not the face of a man who felt anything about what he'd done to any of us. You've been busy, he said. I had help. He picked up his coffee, set it down, looked at the window. He was running calculations, I could see it, working out what I had, what I'd shared with who, how much damage was already done, whether there was still a play available to him. Dad, he said, and his voice was different again. Not warm, not cold, measured. You don't fully understand what you're involved in. The journalist, she has an agenda. These stories get built around a narrative and the truth gets simplified to fit it. I'm not a cartoon villain. Things went wrong. I made mistakes. That's not the same as, you built shell companies, I said, under fake names. You used a dead woman's nephew's name without his knowledge to access a widow. You hid a phone under a floorboard in a woman's apartment. I stopped. What word would you like to use instead of villain? He was quiet for a long moment. I'm not going to be able to fix this today, he said finally. No. I'd like to fix it. I want you to know that. I'd like you to fix it too. I looked at him, at the face I had watched grow from infancy, the face I had seen in hospital light on the day he was born, the face Margaret had kissed goodnight for 17 years. but I'm not going to wait anymore. I spent 40 years giving you the benefit of the doubt. I don't have 40 more." He looked at me then in a way he hadn't looked at me through this whole meeting, not assessing, not performing, just looking. And I don't know what he saw, but something about it seemed to land. "I'm going to need time," he said. "The people I've spoken to aren't going to give you time," I said, "and there's nothing I can do about that anymore." He stood up. He reached for his wallet. His actual instinct was to pay for the coffees, which was so absurdly normal that it nearly broke something in me. And then he stopped and put his wallet back and looked at the table. "I'll be in touch," he said. "Ethan." He paused. I looked up at him. "Your mother would have known before I did. You understand that? She saw you clearly, and she loved you anyway. She would have known, and it would have destroyed her." I held his gaze. "I think somewhere in you, you know that too, and I think that's why you moved so fast after she was gone." His jaw moved. He didn't speak. "I hope that means something to you," I said. "Even now." He walked out of Delancey's without looking back, and I sat there watching through the window as he moved down the sidewalk with his shoulders back and his chin up, making a performance of his own composure. And I watched him until he turned the corner and was gone. Rosa came over and refilled my coffee without asking. She looked at my face and didn't say anything, which was the kindest thing anyone could have done. I sat there for a while. Then I called Claire. "He knows everything," I said, "and he's going to run." A short silence. Then, "Not if we move faster than he does." 4 days later, Detective Osei's unit executed a freeze order on 6 accounts linked to Bennett Capital Advisors, LLC, and its affiliated entities. By the end of that week, Ethan Bennett had been formally named as a person of interest in a financial fraud investigation spanning 3 counties. He had not run. He had not run because he had waited 1 day too long, believing, as he always had, that he could still find the angle, still find the play, still find the version of events that put him on the right side of the room. The performance, in the end, had been the thing that held him still long enough to be caught. The article ran on a Thursday. Claire had told me the night before, her voice carrying the particular quiet of someone who has finished a long piece of work and is not yet sure how to feel about the silence that follows it. "It goes live at 6 in the morning, she said. "Front page digital, above the fold in print. Ray approved the full version." "How long is it?" I asked. 4,000 words with documents." She paused. "Your name is in it, Harold. Your real name, your real story. I want to make sure you're ready for that." I had thought about this moment for weeks. Being named. Being the man in the newspaper who had been deceived by his own son. I had worried, early on, that it would feel like a second humiliation layered on top of the first, that the world knowing what happened to me would somehow compound what had already been taken. But sitting in the Elmwood on that Wednesday night, I found that the fear had mostly dissolved. What was left underneath it was something simpler and more solid. "I'm ready," I said. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be loud." She was not wrong about that. By 8 in the morning, the article had been shared more than 12,000 times. By noon, 3 local television stations had called the Ledger asking for Claire's contact information. By mid-afternoon, the Ledger's tip line had received 47 messages from people across 4 states describing similar schemes, similar documents, similar shell companies, a flood of stories that had been sitting in silence, waiting for someone to open the door. Claire called me at 2 in the afternoon, and she sounded like someone running on 6 hours of sleep across 3 days, which she was. "Harold, I need to tell you something, and I need you to sit down." "I'm already sitting." Detective Osei called this morning, the prepaid phone from Paulette's closet. The forensics came back. There are messages on it between Ethan and at least 2 other individuals about fund movement and the dissolution of accounts. One of the names in those messages belongs to a man who is already under federal investigation for wire fraud in a separate case. She stopped. "This is bigger than we thought. It went up this morning to the federal level. It's not just Detective Osei's unit anymore." I sat with that. Federal. My son's name in a federal investigation. "There's more," Claire said. "The account freeze from last week. When they went through the assets, they found accounts we hadn't identified. The total amount they've frozen is just over $900,000 across all entities." $900,000. 6 victims at minimum, possibly more still coming forward through the tip line. The machine had been running longer and wider than even Claire's investigation had mapped. "How much of my money is recoverable?" I asked. I asked it plainly, without hope loading the question, because I had learned by then that hope applied to uncertain things just makes the uncertainty heavier. "That's still being worked out through the asset forfeiture process. Phil says it could take months, but the freeze means it's protected. It's not gone." She paused. "Most of it is there, Harold. Most of it is actually there." I had not let myself believe that until she said it. And when she said it, I had to set the phone down for a moment and breathe through something that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but lived somewhere between them. The feeling of a man who had prepared himself to lose everything permanently, discovering that permanently may have been too final a word. Ethan was formally arrested on a Friday morning, 8 days after the article ran. I did not find out from a phone call. I found out the way most of the city found out. From a news alert that appeared on my phone at 7:41 in the morning, 2 sentences and a name and a photograph taken outside what appeared to be a downtown office building, his hands not quite visible, officers on either side of him. He was wearing the gray sweater, the same one from Delancey's, and his shoulders were back and his chin was up, even then, even in that moment, performing composure for a camera he hadn't expected and couldn't afford to ignore. I looked at the photograph for a long time. I am not sure what I was looking for. Some sign of the 10-year-old at the end of the diving board, maybe. Some proof that what I had loved had been real, that the child I had raised had existed independent of the adult who had made these choices. I think I needed to believe those were 2 separate people, because the alternative, that they had always been the same person and that I had simply not seen it clearly for 44 years, was a weight I was not sure I could carry and still function. I put the phone down and made coffee, the cheap dark roast. And I stood in the small kitchen of the Elmwood, which was not really a kitchen, just a counter with a hot plate, and drank it while it was still hot, the way Margaret had always told me to and I had always failed to do. I thought about her. I thought about the raised eyebrow. Ethan always has an angle, Harold. All the small things she had said across the years that I had stored without understanding, and that I understood now with the specific, too-late clarity that life saves for its most important lessons. She had known, not the specifics, not the shell companies and the aliases and the floorboard, but the shape of it, the angle behind the warmth. She had loved him the way you love someone whose flaws you can see clearly and have decided to love around. And she had protected me from the full weight of what she saw, because that was what she did, and because she had believed, the way I had believed, that love and time might close whatever gap existed between who Ethan was and who he was capable of being. We had both been wrong, but we had been wrong together, and there was something in that I needed to hold on to. The months that followed were not clean. I want to be honest about that because the version of events that comes out in legal proceedings and newspaper follow-ups tends to have a shape and momentum that the actual living of it does not have. There were delays, and hearings I was not allowed to attend, and weeks of silence from the attorney handling the asset recovery process, and documents I had to sign that I did not fully understand, and at least 2 moments where I sat down in the middle of a task and could not make myself get back up for an hour. The Elmwood was my home for 4 more months after the arrest. Claire tried twice to find me something better, and both times I told her I was fine where I was. I think some part of me was not ready to commit to a place yet. Some part of me was still in the posture of a man waiting to see what was left before he built anything new. Sylvia Marsh called me on a Tuesday evening in what was by then early spring. "Just to check in," she said. We talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of it. About a book she was reading, about Winston the cat's opinion of the changing weather, about a neighborhood bakery near her apartment that made a particular kind of almond cake that Bernard had loved. "Do you talk to people?" she asked at one point. Not as a challenge, as a genuine question. "I'm talking to you," I said. "Outside of this situation, friends, people from before." I thought about Bill in the facility with his wife, Rogelio in the 1 bedroom with his daughter. "Not much," I admitted. "Neither do I," she said. I think we get used to being self-contained, and then something like this happens, and self-contained turns out to mean alone. A pause. There's a group. It's not a therapy group. It's for people who've been through financial exploitation. An attorney who works in elder law started it. They meet on Wednesday evenings. Another pause. I'm going next week for the first time. Okay, I said. I thought you might come with me. I thought about it. The specific discomfort of sitting in a room with strangers and talking about what had happened. The pride that still bristled at the idea of being visible in that particular way. Pick me up, I said. The Wednesday group met in the back room of a community center on Holloway Avenue. Folding chairs in a rough circle, bad coffee in a 30-cup urn, fluorescent lighting that was not doing anyone any favors. There were 11 people the first night, ranging from a woman in her late 50s to a man who was 83 and used a cane and had lost his savings to a caretaker he'd trusted for 9 years. The attorney who ran it was named Diana Chu, a small, precise woman in her 40s who had spent 15 years in elder law and had, she said at the start, lost her own grandfather to a financial scam when she was in law school. That's why I do what I do, she said. And that's why this group exists, not to fix what happened, but to make sure the people it happened to don't disappear inside it. Nobody was required to speak. The first week I sat and listened. The second week I said 3 sentences about the eviction notice and stopped, and nobody pushed me to continue, and that restraint was the most respectful thing anyone could have offered. By the 4th week I told the whole story, all of it. The kitchen table and the wire transfer and the parking lot in the rain, the hospital waiting room, Delancey's and the gray sweater, and my son's face when I said Sylvia's name. I told it to 11 people in folding chairs under fluorescent light, and my voice cracked twice, and I did not apologize for it. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then the man with the cane, whose name was Leonard and who had a dry, precise sense of humor that I had already come to appreciate, said, "You sat across from him in that coffee shop and said all of that?" "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "That took something." "It took being angrier than I was afraid," I said. Leonard pointed at me with one finger. "Write that down somewhere." I almost laughed. The almost laugh felt like something loosening that had been tight for a very long time. Sad. The asset recovery came through in stages. The first distribution arrived 7 months after the arrest, through the court-administered process that Diana Chu helped me navigate. Partial, not complete, but substantial. Enough to stop the Elmwood from being permanent. Enough to make a decision. I found an apartment on Birch Street in the Eastgate neighborhood. A second-floor 2-bedroom in a building that had a small garden in the back that the tenants were invited to use. I had not gardened since the Delbrook house, but Margaret had, and standing in that garden on the afternoon I signed the lease, looking at the early spring dirt and thinking about what might be planted in it, I felt something I had not felt in so long that I almost didn't recognize it. Not happiness, exactly. Not yet. But the precondition of happiness, the sense that there was a future ahead that was still shapeable, that the story was not finished and the remaining chapters were not already written. I called Sylvia from the garden. "I found a place," I said. "Oh, Harold." Her voice was warm in a way that had nothing performed about it. "Tell me." I told her about the garden, about the second bedroom I did not have a use for yet, but which felt important to have, like a door left open. About the way the afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a particular angle that reminded me of the Delbrook house. Margaret would have had that garden producing by June, she said. She would have had it organized by Tuesday, I said. We sat on the phone together for a moment, in the comfortable quiet of two people who have been through something together and do not need to fill every silence. "I have an idea," Sylvia said. "I've been sitting with it for a few weeks, and I wasn't sure if it was right, but I think it might be right." "Tell me." Diana mentioned that the group keeps running into the same problem. People who've been through what we've been through don't know where to go. There's no central place, no clear resource. She's been trying to find funding for something more formal, a foundation that could offer legal navigation assistance and peer support to seniors who've been financially exploited. She paused. She needs people on the board, people who've lived it, people who can speak to it from the inside. I looked at the garden, the winter bare dirt, the possibility of it. "You're asking if I want to be on a board," I said. "I'm asking if you want to be useful," she said. "Which I think, Harold, is what you've been trying to be this whole time." She was not wrong. But the trial was 8 months after the arrest, and I will not give it more space than it deserves here, because it was long and procedural and exhausting in the specific way that legal proceedings are exhausting. Not dramatically, but grindingly, day after day of testimony and documents, and attorneys talking to judges in language that required translation. I testified. I sat in the witness box and answered questions for 2 hours and kept my voice level, and looked at the prosecutor when she asked me things, and looked at the jury when the answer mattered, and did not look at Ethan more than I had to. When I did look at him, he was watching me with an expression I still cannot fully name. Not remorse. I had given up expecting remorse from a man whose face had shown me its true register in that coffee shop. But something that was not nothing either. Something that lived in the gap between who he was and who perhaps some residual piece of him understood he should have been. He was convicted on 11 counts, sentenced to 7 years. The remaining assets were distributed through the court. Not everything, not $240,000 made perfectly whole, because that is not how these things work, and anyone who tells you it is has never sat through the paperwork. But close enough to rebuild on. Close enough to mean that what he had tried to take was not, in the end, fully taken. After the sentencing, I sat outside the courthouse on a concrete bench and let the afternoon sun, which had finally decided to be warm after a long, reluctant spring, come down on my face. Claire sat next to me. She had been there every day of the trial, sometimes in her professional capacity, and sometimes just there, which meant more than the professional capacity, and she knew it. We sat without talking for a while. "What are you going to do now?" she asked eventually. "Board meeting next Thursday," I said. "The foundation is applying for its first grant. Diana thinks we have a strong application." I paused. "And I bought tomato seedlings for the garden. They need to go in before the end of May, or it's too late for the season." She looked at me sideways. "Tomatoes. Margaret grew them every year, big ones, the ugly kind that taste the best." I looked at the sky. "I haven't grown anything in 20 years. I'll probably kill the first batch." "Probably," she agreed, without sugarcoating it, which was one of the things I had come to value about her most. "That's all right," I said. "I have time to try again." We sat in the sun a little longer, and then I went home. I want to speak to you directly now, if you'll allow me that. I have told you this story in full because I believe it needed to be told in full. Not the clean version. Not the version where the father sees it coming and protects himself in time. The version where he doesn't. Where he makes the mistake that his grief and his love and his loneliness made possible, and where he pays for it in ways he is still, honestly, paying for. Because I think there are people listening to this who know exactly what a kitchen table with real estate printouts looks like. Who know what it sounds like when someone you love uses the right words in the right order and makes you feel like trust is wisdom. Who know the particular vulnerability of losing someone and having another person walk into that open wound and call themselves a lifeline. I'm not going to tell you that what happened to me made me stronger. I don't believe pain is a factory for strength. I believe that what you do in the aftermath of pain can build something if you let it, and if you have enough left to build with. But the pain itself, the pain is just damage, and anyone who tells you the damage was worth it has never held an eviction notice in a doorway and understood that it meant their child had planned this. What I will tell you is this: your dignity does not belong to the person who tried to take it. Your savings, your home, your trust. If someone took those things, they took them. But they cannot take what you do next. They cannot take the decision you make when you're on your knees in the parking lot and a stranger puts a hand on your shoulder. They cannot take the moment you decide to stop protecting the name of someone who never protected yours. I protected Ethan for too long. I gave him the benefit of the doubt past the point where doubt was reasonable, because he was my son, and because I had loved him since before he could speak, and because the alternative, accepting what he actually was, required dismantling a version of my own life that I had believed in completely. That dismantling was the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than the eviction, harder than the car, harder than the parking lot in the rain. But I did it, and I am here, Sylvia Marsh is here. She named her cat Winston because Bernard had always wanted a dog named Winston, and she had always said no, and now she has the cat version, and she says Bernard would have found it completely appropriate. She sits on the foundation board with me, and she asks harder questions than anyone else in the room, and she is, I think, one of the most remarkable people I have ever known. I would not have known her if any of this had gone differently. George Paulson is here. He started a volunteer electrician service for low-income seniors in his neighborhood because he said if he couldn't get his money back, he was at least going to get his time into something that mattered. He is gruff and impatient and funny, and I'm glad he exists. Paulette Okafor is here. She went back to school. She is studying forensic accounting, which she says with a level of purposeful irony that I find genuinely impressive. And Claire Dawson is here. Her investigation, following the initial article, produced a 6-part series on financial fraud targeting elderly Americans that won an award I cannot pronounce correctly, and more importantly, contributed to 3 pieces of state legislation requiring enhanced disclosure requirements for private investment vehicles. She does not talk about the award. She talks about the legislation. The tomatoes, for what it is worth, survived. Not all of them. I lost about 1/3 to something I still haven't identified, some combination of overwatering and late cold snap, but enough came through to matter, big, ugly ones that tasted exactly right. I brought a bag of them to the Wednesday group in August and set them on the table next to the bad coffee, and Leonard took one and bit into it over the sink like an apple and said, "Harold, this is an excellent tomato." "I know," I said. "You should grow more." "I'm planning on it." I am 73 years old. I live on Birch Street. I have a garden and a board seat and a group of people who sit in folding chairs on Wednesday evenings and understand, without needing it explained, what it costs to trust the wrong person and what it takes to rebuild after. I do not have my son. I do not know if I will ever make peace with that in the full sense of the word. I sit with it. Some days it is manageable, and some days it is the first thing I feel when I wake up. Not grief exactly, more like the specific ache of something that should have existed and didn't. The father-son thing that I had believed in, intended, and protected, and that turned out to have been, for him, primarily a resource. Margaret would have things to say about all of it. She would have things to say about the tomatoes and the foundation and Claire and the Wednesday group and the second bedroom I have still not found a use for. She would probably have things to say about this story too, about what I chose to tell and what I left out and whether I was being too hard on myself or not hard enough. I think she would approve of the tomatoes, though. I genuinely believe that. Take care of yourselves. Lock your doors. Read the documents. Ask the questions that feel impolite. And if someone who loves you, or claims to, ever makes you feel that asking questions is the same as not trusting them, understand that the discomfort you feel in that moment is important information. Love does not ask you to make yourself smaller to fit inside it. Real love has room. Anyone who needs you diminished to stay close was never offering you love to begin with. They were offering you a transaction dressed up in the language of family, and the difference matters, and you are allowed to know the difference, and you are allowed to act on what you know. I am Harold Bennett. I am 73 years old, and I am not finished.